there, welcome to Humans of Authenticity, and thank you for choosing my podcast. My name is Celia, and I'll be your host. Humans of Authenticity will share many heartfelt conversations with my guests on their stories and how they embrace their authenticity in all forms. Authenticity will be a buzzword unless we pause and reflect on what it means for us, for individuals like you and me. Join me in these conversations. In each episode, my guests will choose a keyword from a selection of 12, which will be used as the theme of the conversation. These keywords change frequently, so you will only hear the same keyword once. Enjoy the episode today. Hi, Celia. Thank you for joining me on this episode and welcome to Humans of Authenticity.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners first?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I love everything that you're doing. So, hi everyone. My name is Celia Chomón Zamora. I am currently the Director of Professional Learning and Certification at ACTFL, which is a membership nonprofit organization that strives to support and empower language educators and language learners across the globe through various facets such as outreach, advocacy, workshops, certifications, and assessments. I'm a first-generation immigrant from Venezuela. My parents are Cuban and of Spaniard descent. We moved to Miami, Florida when I was 6 years old and essentially lived in Miami my whole life. I was an English and Japanese major. I got into teaching, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and ended up absolutely loving teaching. So in the 15 years that I've taught English, Spanish, Japanese. That led me to get eventually a master's in linguistics from Florida International University and eventually a doctorate in applied linguistics from Georgetown University. My entire career has been researcher, advocate, public speaker, educator, all of those wonderful things. My main focus has been really representing, empowering, and highlighting heritage language learners, as well as any underserved and underrepresented community, be it less commonly taught languages, heritage language speakers, immigrant populations, as well as indigenous tribes. And that's currently what I do in my current role. And I'm also a DELPer, which is a part of a scholar of the Diverse Executive Leadership Program, as are you. I just got my CAE and I'm part of the ASAE Research Committee, as well as the CAE Register Provider Committee.
Nice.
That was a very long introduction.
It's an awesome introduction. Now, with that story you just shared, what is the absolute one thing that you love the most about that story?
About my story, the fact that I am a first-generation immigrant and I am where I am today. A lot of times it's really easy to think about immigrants and have a very stereotypical negative view of what they can do or what they can accomplish. So the fact that I'm a first-generation immigrant and I am where I am today shows the hard work, determination, and all that we do. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit for me all of those negative aspects that you have experienced or you've heard in the past?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can even give you a great example. When I was at Georgetown, I think I was in my second year of my doctorate, and I was waiting for the metro to take me back home to Arlington, Virginia. And a couple from Central America, I overheard them speaking Spanish, and they were confused as to how to take the metro. So I approached them in Spanish and I asked them, do you need help? And I was kind of going through the process with them, asking them where they were going and how to get there. And then this elderly couple passes by and says, all of you should just go back to your country. And it was just such a weird moment, because the fact that we were speaking in a different language, which, by the way, officially America doesn't have an official language, but the fact that just because we were speaking in a different language, you already had this very negative connotation of who we were and where we're from. For me, that the question, where are you from, is pretty problematic. As you heard in my introduction, when I'm asked, tell me about yourself, my where are you from takes me about 3 or 4 sentences. And to be honest, I don't really know where I'm from, because I very much consider myself a hyphenated kid. I am Venezuelan, Cuban, American. Even though I was born in Venezuela, that's not where my parents are from. And maybe that's not where my background is from, but I'm also raised in America. So a lot of my culture, a lot of the things that I do and my nuances are American. So a lot of times we have this very stereotypical view of immigrants as people that don't speak the language on purpose, that they fled their country because they didn't want to work it out in their country, that we're lazy, or we can only do certain things, that we're not smart enough to assimilate. Those are kind of the main stereotypes and negative experiences that I've had as an immigrant myself.
I know that it is a known situation, and this happens a lot. About that, where you are from and how it will take you a couple of sentences to elaborate that. Does that nuances confuse you in your early days? Is there a point that you felt that it causes any sort of identity crisis in your early days?
Absolutely. So perfect example, when I was in DC, I was asked, where are you from? And then I said, oh, Miami, Florida. And then there was always that pause that they just kept looking at me. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're not asked because you see me and you think she's not American. Where are you really from? So, okay, well, I'm Venezuelan. But then at that point, I'm like, but my mom is Cuban and my dad is Spaniard. So in terms of where my face comes from, my color and my features, I don't know. It was always that pregnant pause that always kind of gave me that, oh, you're othering me. Like it constantly told me, you're not from here. Where are you from? And the fact that, I mean, I lived my entire life here. Basically, I've lived here since I was 6 years old, and now I'm 39. I mean, 33 years of my life, I've lived in America. So when am I considered American, right? And I think that point really came to a fruition when I was in my 20s. I applied for this program to teach in Japan as a university professor, and they were looking for native speakers of English. So my entire schooling was in English. My bachelor's was in English. My master's in linguistics was in English. I got through the entire application process, which was very arduous, very meticulous. At the very end, I was about to be offered the job, and they asked me for my picture and my bio. I sent that over. I immediately got a call back saying, I thought you said you were a native speaker of English. And I said, yeah, I am. And they're like, but you're Hispanic. And it says that you were born in Venezuela and that you are Latino. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But I've done my entire schooling. I'm a superior level English speaker. And they said, I'm sorry, this job is only for native speakers. And they did not give me the job. So I think at that point was the epitome of my identity crisis, because I am not Venezuelan enough to be Venezuelan. Anytime that I talk to a Venezuelan from Venezuela, they're like, but you're not really Venezuelan. You don't have the accent, you don't have the idioms, or your idioms are very archaic from like the 90s, obviously, that's when I left. But I'm never going to be American enough to be American. So that's why I think now in my 30s and in my womanhood, and after all of the experiences that I've been, I'm extremely proud of my identity. So when I hyphenate my identity, I'm Venezuelan, Cuban, American, I feel like my hyphens are essentially all of my identities holding hands, because all of those hyphens make me who I am and give me the experiences and the platforms that I can talk about to empower others.
I love that image of the three identities holding hands and creating yourself. And your stories resonate a lot with me. I'm Vietnamese born and raised, but I live overseas a much longer duration than the time I lived in Vietnam. Completely hearing your side of the stories. Let's unpack that point of confusion and that feeling of being confused. Does that feeling change these days? Do you still feel that hesitance anymore?
No, because I'm very proud. I'm extremely proud of who I am and what I bring to the table. And I say that now, again, at 39, but I didn't really get to that point until my 30s. And I feel like a lot of things changed. First of all, what changed was my embracing my accent. And there's one of the very popular presentations that I do in my job is called There's an Accent in My Name and in Me. And the reason is because my maiden name, so I go by Celia Chomón Zamora because I didn't want to lose my maiden name. So I made that into my middle name. And there's an accent on the last O of my name because in Spanish it's Chomón. And I used to loathe that accent mark. First of all, because it was very weird, like nobody else had accent marks. Second of all, because I had to learn extra keyboard things to make that little accent go, and it was really annoying. And honestly, sometimes when you would make that accent mark on some programs, it comes up as a little square with like a question mark, and it always messed up my name. And so then I would always say, why does my name have an accent mark? And then honestly, why do I have an accent? Because I lost a lot of opportunities. Originally, I wanted to be in broadcasting. And I went to a broadcasting magnet school. My entire life, I wanted to be broadcasting. And then when I was younger, I applied for an internship by ABC called By Kids for Kids. And I was essentially told by the producers, you're too ethnic, you're too brown, and you have too much of an accent to ever be in front of the camera. Have you thought about just being a producer? And I said, no, I want to be in front of the camera. But then when I looked around, there was nobody that looked or sounded like me back then. So I figured, well, they know better. So for a long time, I really loathed my accent in my name and myself. And it wasn't until my 30s where I started realizing that's what made me who I am. And that's what gave me the power. And then as I started going up in my career, that I realized that I am now a representative of people that look like me and sound like me and have the name like me, that I realized I am finally that person that I needed when I was younger. So now I have to really show up, and I have to be proud of all of the quote unquote defects that I thought I had, but that in fact are what make me special, what make me unique. So now currently, I really embrace my accent. I embrace my identity. And my name is Celia. Sometimes I'll go by Celia just because I am in America. But for some reason, everyone called me Cecilia. I don't understand why. They're adding an extra syllable to my name. It makes it harder. And so everyone would call me Cecilia, and I would just roll my eyes and say, yeah, Cecilia. And then I saw Uzo Amaka. She is one of the stars from Orange is the New Black from Netflix. She said that her mom told her, if people can say Tchaikovsky, if they can say charcuterie board, why can't they say your name? You're absolutely right. Why can't you say, you can learn all of these really difficult words. Why can't you learn my name? So I started correcting people. And I think that's when really I empowered myself because, and I'll say it in a nice way, like, thank you, but my name is actually Celia, not Cecilia. And it's funny, the pushback, because sometimes the pushback I get is, well, no. It's Cecilia, like that Simon and Garfunkel song. Cecilia, you're breaking my heart. Like, no, but I don't care. I no longer like Simon and Garfunkel just because I'm so tired of hearing that song. But I think once I started really accepting who I was and not apologizing for making people uncomfortable with my name, my accent, or my accent marks, is when I really no longer feel that. But it took a long time for me to get to that point. But hopefully now that there's people like us, like you and me, and all of these diverse representations, hopefully children and future generations don't have to wait that long to finally feel empowered in who they are.
I love that stories, and I hear a lot of reflections and learning from it. If you go back to that point in time where you realize that you can embrace your name, embrace the accents in your name, do you remember what happens at that point in time that trigger your perspective and your transitions around that?
Yeah, I know exactly when it was. It was 2012. I had just gotten into my doctoral program at Georgetown. My husband and I were looking for a place to live. We found this really nice apartment neighborhood near Navy Yard. And we were sitting there waiting for someone to show us the apartment. And we wrote down our name and we were waiting for someone to call us to show us the apartment. And this gentleman comes down and says, Cecilia? And I roll my eyes. I'm like, yeah, that's Cecilia. And so he takes us upstairs and we're in the elevator. And he starts telling me about his daughter that was just born. And I'm like, oh, okay. He wants to start a conversation. So we start talking about his baby. My husband's in the back thinking, okay, that's weird, but okay. He takes us to the apartment. And the apartment is, of course, in complete disarray because his wife just had a baby. So I'm thinking that's a really weird apartment to show me, but okay. So I'm here asking questions about the den. I'm asking questions about the kitchen. And then I see the woman in the back breastfeeding her baby. I'm like, hi, nice meeting you. So I start asking questions, and essentially what ended up happening was that Cecilia was the name of the nanny they were interviewing. And so I said, oh my gosh, what a weird mistake. No, my name is not Cecilia, it's Celia. I'm here to actually see the apartment. And then the gentleman said something along the lines of, but you're Hispanic. As in, like, why would you be here to look at an apartment? You're clearly here. The only reason you'd be here is to work for me as a nanny. And so then I said, well, best of luck with your baby. Goodbye. And my husband and I ran out of there. And he, of course, said, this only happens to you. I'm like, you know what? It's honestly my fault, because I should have just said, no, my name's not Cecilia. It's Celia. And I'm here to see an apartment. But it's that whole idea of people pleasing and not wanting to make people feel uncomfortable. And this constant thing that I think a lot of immigrants and underrepresented communities have of, let me just make myself smaller, or let me take the discomfort so that I don't make others uncomfortable because of my name or my identity. At that point on, I decided that I will always correct people on my name, just so that I don't have to go through that weird experience anymore.
I love that. And I love the tenacity that you express in that examples too. I went through that similar situations. My name's spelling VY, and I often start with Y as a way to spell it. I often not correcting people, but now as I'm in a meeting with colleagues, my colleagues start correcting people on my behalf.
Good.
Which I really appreciate, but it makes me questioning, why does people have to correcting others the way that others saying my name for me? Where am I in that situation? What could I've done in that situation? So I love how you identify that point and make it as your point of empowerment. Let's move to the second part of our conversations, and I really look forward to it. I provided you with a list of 12 keywords to choose from. Which word did you select?
Vulnerability.
In the context of authenticity, how do you interpret vulnerability, and why does this word pop up for you?
I think there is no better way to really be authentic than to show our own vulnerability. We live in a society right now where social media runs rampant with perfect mothers, perfect lunchboxes, perfect vacations, perfectly groomed children under a perfectly clean house. And that's, of course, the life that we want to showcase. Nobody wants to really show the real us, where right behind that picture, there are 17 piles of laundry that haven't been put away, or the fact that it took you 20 takes to take that beautiful picture because your kids were cranky and hungry, or the fact that maybe you haven't had a chance to shower in 3 days because you have a newborn that just doesn't let you sleep. Nobody wants to show that, because it shows weakness, and it shows lack of control, and it shows that you're human. And I feel like humanity has really been removed from the conversation a lot. So in everything that I do, whether it's speaking publicly or whether it's honestly managing my team at ACTFL, I always strive to be vulnerable, because no one is perfect. Nobody is perfect. And I feel like when we constantly look up to people that look always so put together, we don't see what's really behind the scenes. Like the fact that I'm currently director of professional learning at ACTFL, people see that and say, wow, you know, she got her master's, she got her doctorate, and she got this great job. Do you know that it took me 2 years from the first time that I applied to ACTFL? Because the first time that I applied to ACTFL, I did not get the job as senior manager of quality assurance. So then I asked them to let me just do anything for them, whether it was volunteer, work as a consultant. And I did that for 2 years. And within those 2 years, I applied to about 80 something jobs, and I got 80 something no's, or I was ghosted. It's really easy to look at me right now and say, wow, look at all the accolades that she has. Look at all the great things she's done. But do you know how many no's and how many closed doors and how many tears I had before getting to this point? So I constantly tell people that, to show them, wherever you are in life right now, even if you're currently in your section of no's, it's okay, persevere, because you can eventually get to that point. But if we're not vulnerable with each other and with our staff, our direct reports, our mentees, then they're constantly going to think that there's something wrong with them, because they are not as put together or as successful as the people they look up to.
That's really cool. And I hardly hear leadership being portrayed in such angle. So let's unpack that a little bit, of course. How do you express vulnerability in team environments, because in corporate environments, through books, we always learn to be composed, to be well prepared, to be assertive, stand on your point. And if we are a woman, we are told that we are so aggressive. Of course, I have to bring that up. Can you give me an example of when was the last time you shared that sense of vulnerability with your team? How does that look like?
Sure. This week, I have a team member. I'm not going to say her name, but hopefully by the time that this airs, it'll be public knowledge anyway. I have a team member who's pregnant, and she is just going through a rough time. She's going through an extremely rough first trimester. And she kept apologizing, saying, I'm sorry that I'm constantly sick in the mornings. I'm not going to be able to go to our annual meeting. I've been really behind on my work and everything. And I stopped her and I said, I was pregnant during my doctorate. And I still remember the fact that every time that I would pull up at Georgetown with my husband, I would open the door, throw up, clean my face, and go into class. And there were times in class that I missed days because I fell asleep or I had to ask to turn in my assignments later. Like, it's okay. You are making a human. And that's understandable. And we all have rough days, whether we're having a sick day or we're having a mental health day or whatever. There are plenty of reasons why sometimes our work lags a little bit. What can I do to help you? What can I do to support you? I could have just told her that I had a great pregnancy. I could have just told her, hey, plenty of people have been pregnant before you and they get their work done, so figure it out. I could have said, I have a 9-year-old and my life is great. But instead, I chose to be vulnerable and tell her about the rough patches of my pregnancy, but that it gets better and that you learn and it's okay and that we're here to support you. It also happens a lot when I talk to my mentees, for example, whether my mentee is the direct reports at my job or outside of my job, where they're going through a rough time finding a job, or they're going through a rough time with their own managers. And I'll let them know about times that I've had very bad managers. And I feel like that's where I've learned the most in my leadership journey, looking at the bad managers I've had and then doing the opposite of what they did, and kind of showing them how I felt defeated. I also cried, I felt angry, and then how I was able to take those emotions and manipulate them to then look at the positive aspects of it and what I can learn from the situation so that I can move forward. But if I just always told them I've had such a great life and things are always great and dandy, then where's the learning coming from?
I love that. So I'm curious, from your staff members' perspective, did you observe any impacts on them after that conversations or their expression of emotions after that conversations? Like, how does they take that conversation?
One of the most important parts of leadership for me is communication and transparent communication. How do you expect someone to trust you with what's really important if you don't trust them with what's really important? Like, vulnerability begets vulnerability, trust begets trust. So after me sharing my vulnerability as a leader, and mind you, that doesn't mean that every day I'm having conversations about my personal life and that I cry and all these other things. Of course not. There are times and places for these things. And there is a lot to be said about being the composed one, being the strong one, but knowing when to have these conversations and knowing when to show vulnerability. I have seen that my team has an extremely tight-knit, strong relationship. All of us trust each other. I know that my team members will come to me and say, I am overwhelmed. I need help. How many times have we been drowning in our work and we don't tell anybody? Because asking for help is scary. Asking for help means that we are admitting defeat, that we are admitting weakness, and that we're terrified that the person is going to judge us and say, oh, well, you can't handle this. My team members feel very empowered with me to say no, to hold strong in their boundaries, and to say, look, Celia, this project sounds great, but right now is not a good time. I have all of these things on my plate. What can we take off our plate currently so that we can put this project in? And if we can't, then that means that this project is a not right now project. And those are the reasons that they can say that to me, is because I have had those same conversations with them, or I've shown them how I've had those conversations with my boss so that I can model that behavior. So we definitely see a lot of empowerment, a lot of growth, a lot of confidence, and a lot of trust in my team.
That sounds awesome. There is an interesting point that you shared just now is know when to show vulnerability. And that's for me is the boundaries that we created not only for ourselves, but for the team. So from a staffing perspective, what cues should we be looking for to know that's the time for us to be vulnerable and share things with our managers?
I think it's a really personal question based on the relationship that you have with that person. I can say what works for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for somebody else. For example, I think vulnerability and that transparent trust has to be built little by little. When you're first onboarding a staff member, is not the time to say, you know, I cry a lot when I was in your job. I mean, it's not one of those times. You have to build little by little up to it, right? And just really take cues. Take physical, verbal, and facial cues from your staff, like when they really need to kind of hear that it's okay to not be perfect. I will say that when there are very strong deadlines coming up, that's not necessarily the time. Like when you have a very urgent project, that's the time. You can still work with your team members, you can still support them and empower them, but that's not the time to say these things. It's always good to come back to that conversation when things are settled or when things are calmer and say, hey, I noticed that this and this happened. Can you tell me what happened? I think that it's really good to be always investigative. I think a lot of us go into problems or go into situations with our colleagues and our staff and just automatically jump in saying, I know what's going on, or I know what's happening with you, or I know the solution. But most of the time we don't. So I think if we go into these issues or these problems and really go in with this investigative mindset of, hey, I noticed that you've been logging into work quite late recently. Can you tell me what's going on? Can you fill me in on what I'm not seeing? And then have them tell you, because maybe they'll tell you, look, my partner and I just got separated. And now we're trying to figure out who takes the kid to school. Or I just realized that now I'm responsible for taking my kid to school and I'm not getting in on time. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. You know, what can I do to make sure that you're successful in what you're doing? And if it's one of those things that that person needs to be on the clock at that point, say, okay, well, here are the boundaries that I have set for this job. And here's where we can be flexible. There's always places to be flexible, right? Not everyone has a flexible time environment that they can just say, okay, that's fine, log in half an hour later. But maybe there's something you can work out in the meantime, right? Until things get fixed. Or, hey, so how long do you think it'll take you to kind of like figure this new time out? I mean, do you think that we need to maybe have one of your team members temporarily log in a little earlier to cover you while you figure out the transportation situation? The point is that you investigate, you see what's going on, and then you start trying to figure out how you can best support that person or meeting halfway. You're still showing strength and you're still showing that obviously there are boundaries and expectations. You're never like lowering your expectations, but you are showing them humanity and you are showing them empathy, and that there are always workarounds and there are ways that we can make you, both of us, successful.
What I'm hearing is that it's really a judgment call and it can be very personal. So my question is, have you ever made a wrong call when picking up the cues or when making that judgment call?
Absolutely.
Can you tell me, can you share a story with us?
Sure. I did have a staff member that just didn't really care. She did not want to be there. She had really no interest in really being at the job. She had no interest in staying there long term and didn't really want to grow. And that's okay. There is a place and a time and a place for that too. So with this staff member, I did consistently try to work with her. I tried to meet her where she was at. I tried to relate to her and show vulnerability that I've been in jobs where I didn't necessarily think that my best attributes were being used, but this is what I learned from that job and this is how I moved forward. And honestly, the response I always got was like, okay, I don't really care. And in fact, I overheard her finally one day kind of tell people that my boss constantly is trying to relate to me and it's so annoying. I wish you would just leave me alone and just tell me what to do and that's it. And I learned at that point, I'm like, okay, I could see that from her facial expressions, but you know, sometimes people are just very guarded. So I think at that point, I learned more about that. Not everyone wants to grow and not everyone wants a safe environment. Some people are just literally there to get in and get out, and that you have to really adapt your leadership style and adapt all of these things based on the person. And that was really early on in my leadership career. Yeah.
I'm particularly curious about this instance, and it's come from my own experience. A lot of time when things doesn't go my way, I often internalized it.
Yes.
Reflecting what else could I have done to improve the situation. Did that sort of thoughts occur to you?
So let me preface that by saying that there is this life-changing book that I read called The Four Agreements. It was an amazing life-changing book. I can't remember the author right now. Oh my gosh. Don Miguel Ruiz is the name of the author. And one of the first agreements is don't take things personally. And that sounds so much easier said than done, especially for a person like me who was a people pleaser, who is very controlling and organized, and who is very empathetic. So because I'm very empathetic, I tend to feel a lot of people's emotions, and I'm very emotional myself. Yes, at that point, instead of focusing on the millions of times that has gone well, and the millions of instances that I clearly see the impact of being vulnerable and my leadership style, I chose to focus on that one time that person said that about me. And then I focus on that saying, wow, I am doing a horrible job. My whole leadership journey is a scam. Like I am a fraud, imposter syndrome, and so forth. When I read that book, I realized that no matter anything that happens in life, whether it's positive or negative, it's not about us. It's never about us. So when a person comes to me and says, wow, you were the best leader, you were the best manager that I've ever had, even though that's really nice to hear, it has nothing to do with me. What it has to do is with that person and their life at that moment. Whatever I was saying resonated with them, their life experiences, their background, and their perspectives at that particular moment. So what they were receiving from me meshed and aligned perfectly. So for them, that was perceived that I was a good leader. Conversely, if someone told me, wow, you were a really horrible manager, as much as that's a hard pill to swallow, you have to realize that at that point in time, whatever I was doing, because it could have been the exact same for both people, whatever I was doing did not align, did not mesh with that person currently. It didn't. They have plenty of other things going on in their head. Maybe they have a very different background they're coming from. And no matter what I could have done, it was going to be perceived as negative. So either positive or negative, it's never about you. And it's never regarding you. It's always about that person, their perceptions, what they are receiving, and their own background. So yes, at that moment, I did 100% take that personally. But since then, through reading that book and really working day in and day out on not taking things personally, I can probably hear that comment right now and say, well, it wasn't their cup of tea, moving on. And that's it. And realizing that it's not about me, it's about them and whatever they're going through.
I'm loving your stories. To be honest, I think you really show me the real Celia today, and thank you for being so open about it. I can see as very strong and consistent values as you go through different stories. Granted that at different points in life, our takes on different situations will be different, but there is that one things going through the story. So I really appreciate that story from you. We are getting to the end of the conversations. I'd love to stay longer, but time permits. So what's next for you in the coming 12 months?
A lot. So I think I'm at the point, I feel ready to start really throwing my hat in the ring for executive director roles. I think that I have cemented myself as a leader, as a person who inspires others. And now that I have my CAE and I have all of these things under my belt, I feel very confident in doing so. So that's one goal for 2024, as well as really just continue to spread my message about what it takes to be a really good leader, that leadership is not just about things that are learned in books or, I went to West Point Military Academy. I don't know, I think I probably didn't mention that. They always had like these 14, 10 to 14 leadership traits that are the very typical ones that you hear. But I feel like empathy and vulnerability are such big ones that we don't focus on. that's what, when all else fails, that sticks around, and that's what makes your teams want to follow you, and that will follow you wherever you go, and will honestly forgive a lot of things. So I really hope that through my current position and a lot of seats at current tables that I have, I can now promote that vulnerability, that empathy and leadership to help others, as well as really continue to help underrepresented, underserved communities in whatever, capacity that I can.
Thank you so much for that. And I wish you all the best. So think about that vulnerability and think about using that as a superpower for yourself. How does vulnerability fit in your plan to achieve these goals you want to do in the next 12 months?
If I were to pick a superpower, I would definitely say that it's building relationships with anyone. And that comes through vulnerability. Because when you start being vulnerable yourself with others, they feel more comfortable being vulnerable with you. And it's a really weird thing. When you were younger, when we were kids, you felt very hesitant to tell someone a secret because that means they hold all the power. But then when they share a secret with you and you share a secret with them, you kind of both hold power because, oh, well, if you tell my secret, I have a secret that I can tell about you, right? So, and I know it's a really weird way of thinking, but I hang out with a lot of kids because of my son. So that's the little dynamic I see in current 8 and 9-year-olds. I feel like the same goes with vulnerability as adults. You're very hesitant to build a real authentic relationship with someone if you're the one constantly putting yourself out there, putting your heart on your sleeve, showing your real self, and the other person is just like this very inauthentic, composed person. So why would you ever really want to share and build relationships with someone like that? So I feel that in the next year, me continuing to build real, authentic, trusting, vulnerable relationships with real people will help me be able to get to those networks and be able to really break through a lot of these glass ceilings and walls that people have built to really help not just their leadership journey, but hopefully mine as well.
I think what's inspired me about this conversation is how much you are just so sure about yourself. And at the beginning, we established there was a period when you were a bit hesitant and take back. So if you could go back in time to that point of your younger, confused self, what would you tell the young Celia?
I have a 9-year-old son, and I'm breaking a lot of generational curses or generational things, as I think a lot of us are doing. And one of the things is I always knew my parents loved me and my mom was very loving, but my dad was a little bit more stoic. And there were times in the day that maybe 1 or 2 or 3 particular days I wouldn't hear something positive just because life is so busy and so forth. So regardless of whether I'm traveling or where I am, I make sure that at night I tell my son, or when he was younger, I would tell him, in Spanish, it's called cositas lindas. In other words, nice things. So I would tell him all the things that I appreciate and love about him. And then now when he's older, I'm having him tell me every night, what are the things that you love and appreciate about yourself, right? But we always end with this quote. And this is the quote that I would have told myself. No matter what kind of day you've had, loving, silly, rough, or tough, you are always important and you are always enough. And I think that as a young Latina immigrant who was navigating a lot of weird things, identity issues, language issues, accents, and microaggressions, and that I felt like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. I wasn't Venezuelan enough. I wasn't American enough. I was too ethnic or not this enough. If I would have someone tell me that I was enough and that I was important, I think that would have gone a really long way. So I make sure to tell that to my son every single night.
That is really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. We're getting to the last question of the episode. Again, thank you for staying with me. Now, this is a fun one. So imagine that you are going on a dream vacation tomorrow. What is the one item that you take with you?
Oh my gosh, it's hard. I would say my Remarkable. And no, I am not getting commission on this, but the Remarkable is the best present my husband got me. It's essentially a paper tablet that you can put your calendars, your notebooks, make folders, to-do lists. And the reason I would take that is because that affords me the possibility to create schedules, itineraries, mark things off my list, have a journal where I can do reflections. I can download books and annotate them. I can play Sudoku. I can do word searches. So I think that would keep me very entertained no matter where I go.
Nice. Thank you so much for that. And thank you again for your time and sharing your story. That's it for today's episode. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear your take on the chosen keyword. Have a lovely time, and thank you again for spending time with Humans of Authenticity. Until next time.